Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us for the next lecture in the By4 Collective Photography and Democracy series. We're joined this evening by Leigh Raiford, Professor of African American and African Diaspora Studies at the University of California, Berkeley. Professor Raiford is the author of Imprisoned in a Luminous Glare, Photography and the African American Freedom Struggle, and also co-author of Collaboration, A Potential History of Photography with Ariella Azoulay, Wendy Ewald, Susan Meiselas, and Laura Wexler. She's also series editor with Sarah Elizabeth Lewis and Deborah Willis of Vision and Justice, an imprint for Aperture Books. But today, very excitingly, she'll be talking about a forthcoming book with Duke, When Home is a Photograph, Blackness and Belonging in the World, which is very soon to be out in the world. It comes out on Tuesday, so we're privileged and excited to have Professor Raiford join us today to discuss some of the ideas that are explored in that book. All right, Leigh, I'll hand over to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you to Tom Albison, Colleen Riley, and Helen Trumpetteller for inviting me. I'm really excited to be in conversation with you all, and I want to thank all of you for joining today. I've been really inspired by the By4 Photography and Democracy collective statement that since its invention in the 19th century, photographs and their circulation have played a role in revolutions, legal shifts, and cultural change. And sort of thinking through the, sort of two poles of, writing or thinking about photography and democracy on one hand as a tool in colonialism, and the collective statement quotes Ariella Azoulay, and then thinking about photography's relationship to justice, quoting Sarah Lewis. And part of why I'm inspired by this is because I've had the opportunity to work with both Sarah and Ariella. And I think Colleen and I think the folks are handling the slides for me because there's just, I don't know, Zoom is, I'm acting like I'm new to Zoom. But anyway, so next slide, please. Thank you. So in 2024, after about 7 years of working with Ariella, Wendy Ewald, Susan Meiselas, and Laura Wexler, we published a book entitled Collaboration, A Potential History of Photography. And this pedagogical and curatorial research project attempts to a radical rethinking of the history and historiography of photography, not as the received narrative of individual auteurs and entrepreneurs, but through the lens of collaboration. And the book examines some 120 photography projects spanning 2 centuries and from almost every part of the globe. And in doing so, it enabled us to place questions about power, authority, participation, and circulation that I think have animated a history of photography from below and from the margins to place those questions at the very center of the field. We commissioned more than 100 writers to produce short texts. A few of those writers are here, which is really wonderful to see. And in the goal is for the book to serve as a kind of resource for future students, artists, curators, critics, scholars, and practitioners to imagine a decolonial potential future for photography in all its aspects. So that pole of sort of recognizing photography as a kind of handmaiden to imperialism, colonialism, or as Ariella Azoulay often invokes, that photography didn't begin in 1839, but we have to understand it as beginning in 1492, that made possible a way of seeing the world as readily consumable and exploitable. I've also, next slide, please. I've also had the good fortune to work as a series editor with Sarah Lewis and Deb Willis on the Vision and Justice book series, which is an imprint of Aperture. This series focuses on prolific but understudied photographers and thinkers, and the series aims to correct, omissions in our received canons of photography in order to tell richer, more racially inclusive stories. But more than this, not merely additive, the aim is to think about what happens when we center Black practitioners working across photography's many forms. What kind of new questions of our histories do we ask, and what new questions of the medium come up for us? For me, the Vision and Justice series is also about honoring legacy and mining the archive. And in the case of the Corrine Simpson book that just came out last year, and our next volume on civil rights era photographer Doug Harris, we've been really assembling archives. And this archival work becomes leads us to sort of think about the lessons that the archives and these images can offer us for this moment. I've said, people have heard me say this. I really believe that this is ancestor work, which is also future generations' work. I think of it as providing guidebooks for ourselves and for those to come about how our elders navigated inhospitable terrain, how they moved through the darkest of times as we ourselves are moving through a very dark time, and how they use their cameras to light new paths. Ultimately, I think what both of these projects have taught me about photography and democracy, but really about photography as a tool, as a medium, is that people are constantly experimenting with photography. And that is the work that I think I've tried to embrace in the new book that's coming out, When Home is a Photograph. Before I get to that, I just want to talk a little bit about my first book, Imprisoned in a Luminous Glare, which helps set the stage for this new project. Next slide, please. Oops, excuse me, sorry. Okay. So when Imprisoned in a Luminous Glare, this book, my apologies, I just lost the images of, let's see. Let's see. Sorry about that. Okay. So Imprisoned in a Luminous Glare attempted to really understand how photography, how civil rights activists utilized photography as part of their movement strategies. I wanted to understand how the role photography played in the long African American freedom struggle, particularly in organized movement seeking racial equality and social justice. Through the chapters focus on the anti-lynching campaigns of the late 19th and early 20th century, the modern civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s, and with a focus on the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, on the Black Power Revolution, specifically the photographic work of the Black Panther Party in the 1960s and 70s, with a final chapter looking at how contemporary artists and activists use photography and what return to these images in contemporary moments. And what that project helped me understand was that photography has functioned as a necessary tool in an ongoing battle for justice that takes place in the visual field, as well as in courtrooms and classrooms, in the streets, and in public memory. Next slide, please. So this new project, When Home is a Photograph, Blackness and Belonging in the World, focuses on how Black people use photography to make home in the world. It's like In Prison in a Luminous Glare, it offers an opportunity to consider photography as practiced by figures of the Black, and specifically Black American radical tradition, but building on a lot of the archival work that I've done and the research that I've done, I've come to recognize that the photographic archives of Black activists, intellectuals, and organizations provide a critical yet understudied resource for illuminating this fraught history and politics of Black representation. So if the first book was concerned with photography as a social movement strategy, photography as a conscious weapon, this book is interested in photography in more intimate context, still fraught and political, but imbued with more complex personal motivations. More specifically, I'm interested in the way quotidian photographs, quiet images of family, of the domestic, of the everyday, and unspectacular give shape to our understanding and visualization of Black life, even for those who are the most recognizable, most vocal, and most resistant figures in our political culture. So the book focuses on a handful of well-known Black American activists and artists who traveled the world for study, for work, for movement building, sometimes for pleasure, and sometimes because their lives and the lives of their loved ones depended on it. Like many of us, their personal sense of self and their political platforms were elaborated through these encounters with the world. And like many of us, they made and collected photographs at every stage. So the book is interested in these everyday image-making practices and habits that this group of Black Americans, each committed to improving the conditions of Black lives globally, have engaged to imagine, to create, to fabulate, to inhabit, to leave, to defend, and sometimes destroy something called home. Over the course, so the next slide, please. Actually, we'll go one more slide, please. So there are 4 chapters in the book. The first chapter examines the photographic collaboration between Marcus Garvey, the leader of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, the Pan-Africanist organization that he was head of from its founding in 1916 through his death in the 1940s, and it examined how the UNIA collaborated with famed Harlem studio photographer James Van Der Zee. Next slide, please. The second chapter looks at Eslanda Goode Robeson, who is probably best known as the wife of actor and activist Paul Robeson, but she herself was an anthropologist, a writer, and a political activist. This chapter looks at a series of photographs that Eslanda Robeson made as part of her PhD fieldwork on a 1936 trip to Southern Africa, in which she took her 9-year-old son, Paul Robeson Jr. And I'm going to spend a little time talking about this chapter. Next slide, please. The third chapter comes out of 3 years that I spent leading a small group of writers, of scholars, photographers, and archivists, helping former Black Panther Kathleen Neal Cleaver organize, digitize, assess her personal photography collection. And the chapter focuses on an album that Cleaver made in the 1980s about the family's time living in exile in Algiers and France from 1969 and 1972. Next slide, please. The last chapter emerges out of the pandemic, and I will spend a little time thinking about talking about this chapter as well. And it looks at the the photography plus installations work of photographers Dawoud Bey and Sadie Barnette. In all, taken together, the book wants to foreground photography as a space of experimentation, of practice and study in the context of Black life, that we are often asking questions with the camera rather than making definitive statements. And I want to spend time thinking about how, when we pay attention to these everyday images, we can also learn different ideas around Black freedom. I also spend a lot of time, I think this book is really animated in many ways by, animated, often propelled by not only my own close readings of images, but also my own misreadings of images, things that I missed or got wrong the first dozen times that I looked at them. And so throughout the book, I'm trying to share a method of slow looking and discovery. Slowing down and closely spending time with images not only can reveal new insights, but I also believe, and I know this to be true of myself, it can literally slow our heart rate and lower our blood pressure. And this too, the practice of slow looking, I really do believe is an urgent corrective to the kind of political crises that we find ourselves in. These sort of question, the sort of crisis of democracy right now, I believe that actually compels us to slow down, to look carefully, to think before we speak. And I want to try and practice that throughout this book. So with that, I'm going to share a couple of excerpts from the book. I'm returning to, again, the question, one of the sort of provocations that the collective, the By4 Collective, puts forward, that asks us to think about that contemporary conversations around photography, no matter which side of this issue, photography as a tool of imperialism and power, or photography as a route to justice and equity, that the sense that we tend to skip over the process, as the collective writes, by which photography has been repeatedly linked with accessibility and neutrality, the role it has played in confusing seeing with knowing and existing with being seen. These characteristics seem crucial to photography's, both of photography's imperial power and its revolutionary potential, to the way it can promise democracy while reinforcing hegemony and vice versa, the way it furthers global capitalism while also providing a means of challenging it. So I think, so if we go to the next slide, okay, I'm going to read from the second chapter of the book on Eslanda Robeson, and which begins with these two photographs. So I'll just go ahead. So here are two photographs we might loosely call family portraits. Both were made by Eslanda Goode Robeson in 1936 during her 3-month tour of South Africa, Uganda, and the Belgian Congo, as she was working toward a PhD in anthropology at the London School of Economics. and taking a pause from managing the career of her husband, the celebrated singer, actor, and activist Paul Robeson. Both photographs later appeared in Goode Robeson's published travel memoir, African Journey, 1945, drawn from her handwritten diary and ethnographic field notes from this earlier trip, the first of 3 she would make to the African continent during her lifetime. Both photographs present people of African descent in full or near full body, facing the camera directly. In this context, what I seem to be describing are ethnographic images. Still, I want to call them family portraits because both photographs feature groups of people variously related by blood, by tribe, by filiation, by curiosity, and by proximity. More specifically, we might call them family portraits because they both include the photographer's 8-year-old son, Paul Robeson Jr., affectionately called Paulie by his parents. In the first photograph, Paul Jr. appears with Zach Matthews, his wife Frida, and their 4 children. The Robesons stayed at the Matthews off and on in the last week of June 1936 at the Matthews home on the campus of Fort Hare Missionary College in Alice, a small town in the Eastern Cape province of South Africa, almost 150 miles northeast of Port Elizabeth. Zach, whom Eslanda had met in courses at the London School of Economics, was now a teacher of, quote, Bantu studies in Alice. In the photograph, Paul Jr. At far left, stands in line with the Matthews' 3 oldest children. Paul Jr. wears a button-down, short-sleeved white shirt and khaki shorts, just like the 2 other boys. At the same height, Paul Jr. and the Matthews' older daughter stand side by side, with matching smiles and each holding half a piece of fruit in their left hands. Their bodies squarely framed by Zach's shoulders. Paul Jr. and the girl twin each other. Can we get the next slide, please? Similarly, Paul Jr.'s facial angle echoes that of Frida as they both smile for Robeson's camera. Zach's right hand rests on Paul Jr.'s shoulder. His left hand appears on Frida's shoulder. Frida's hands rest on the shoulders of 2 of her children, with the photograph creating a series of circles of visual rhyming patterns. Paul Jr. is successfully enfolded into the Matthews family. Eslanda, can we go back a slide? Thanks. Eslanda made the second photograph on August 6, 1936 in Ngite, a so-called pygmy village and popular tourist site in the Ituri forest of the Belgian Congo. In this image, Paul Jr. stands to the far right side of the frame, which centers a group of village elders. The child and the village elders are all about the same height, probably about 4 feet 7 inches, which Eslanda notes as, quote, the average height of the village men. They each occupy the same visual plane. According to Eslanda, Paulie and the headmen of Ngite regarded each other with curiosity, finding connection by way of their similar sizes, but searching for clues about difference in age. By photographing a dark-skinned child with a serious countenance in adult-style clothing, Eslanda affects a contrast to popular safari photographs of the time. Full-grown white men and women visitors to Ngite were towering whiteness, emphasized dissimilarity, worked to ridicule the pygmies, and bolstered arguments for the fundamental distinctions, read hierarchies between races. Yet Paul Jr.'s pith helmet, a hat commonly worn by British officials in the tropics, and his hands thrust into his khaki pants mark him as foreign and highlight difference in distance. This distance is underscored by the gazes that Paul Jr. and the Ngite elder train on each other across the full plane of the image, rather than on the photographer. Indeed, almost no one in the photograph seems to be looking in the same direction, and one person in the background is a moving blur. In the photograph with the Matthews family, Paul Jr.'s inclusion draws fictive, though still heartfelt bonds of kinship between the African-American Robesons and the Bantu Matthews, visually reconnecting the Black family broken by and scattered in diaspora. Conversely, the Ngite photograph is an image of first encounter, albeit one of respect and curiosity, rather than established connection. Paul Jr. and the Ngite people are all here in this photograph, we might say, but they are not together. Taken together, though, these two photographs featuring Paul Jr., made on a trip that was at once research and tourist excursion, impel me to ask what exactly is the distance between family portraiture of beloveds and blood ties and ethnographic photography of others and objects of study. And in an era of colonial entrenchment, what distinguishes a colonial image, by which I mean an image in service to imperial projects, from an image made in the context of colonialism, that is, an image made in a historical moment, not under conditions of its own choosing? Is it the photographer's selection of subject, their choice of framing, their orchestration of the scene, or the absence of direction altogether? Is the difference found in the photographed person's gaze, pose, or posture, whether an imagined insistence on self-fashioning or tense stasis? Is the difference in the conditions of collaboration, that is, how these two or more people found themselves facing one another, at once separated and joined by a camera? Does the distinction lie in the terms of their exchange? Perhaps we'd parse the difference in the captioning of the photograph, the language of description that draws attention to a type, a landscape, a natural order, or an individual with a name and perhaps a story. Or perhaps the contrast between family portraiture and ethnographic photography, or between photographs of versus photographs for colonialism, is in their circulation and usage, books or postcards or government reports or family albums. But if, say, a single photograph for a single archive functions in all of these ways, well, that means these distinctions are never stable and always in motion. The Ngite photograph has always sat uncomfortably with me and forced me to look a bit more closely at those photographs that seem to suggest mutuality, to assert a distinct Pan-African gaze over a colonial one. Yet, in attempting a Black American photographic practice that aims to be a visual counter-narrative that reframes global Black subjectivity, could such a Pan-African gaze also reinscribe hierarchies of power in looking and the unevenness of looking relations between differently positioned diasporic subjects? And if so, how? Let's see, let's go to, I think I have a little bit more time. So can we go to the next 2 slides down, please? Okay. Take, for example, the number of Eslanda's photographs that repeat colonial image tropes. She was no doubt familiar with cliché poses, framings, and descriptive language through her anthropological research, as well as through the circulation of carte de visite and postcards, some of which she herself purchased and mailed to friends and family. Mother and child images and images depicting hair braiding appear frequently in the colonial archive, and such images are included in Eslanda's archive. Or consider who receives the courtesy of naming in her captions and who does not. Or what about Eslanda's use of the word use of typical, a word that reduces individuals to types and squeezes complex peoples into neat boxes? While I no longer feel certain that we can see in Eslanda's images an unequivocal colonial counter-archive, I also no longer believe that such an archive exists. So entangled are the accumulations of meanings and uses of these images, and as Zoe Samudzi reminds us, so, quote, undecolonizable is the camera itself. I do argue, though, that Eslanda strove within and against the colonial image archive, as she encountered it, to find a mode of communication for her personal and political commitments. So here are an image in its verso, a postcard Eslanda purchased in the middle of her trip to send to her dear friends Carlo and Fania Van Vechten in New York City. The slightly sepia-toned photograph on the front of the postcard features a dark-skinned woman visible from the chest up against a flat white background, while her torso is directed almost fully to the camera. Her head is in partial profile, somewhere between the 45-degree angle of the venerated portrait and the 180-degree angle of the scientific or criminal study. Her gaze is directed to her right, the viewer's left, and slightly downward. The framing enables us to see the impressive height of her isikholo. And to our South African friends joining us here, please excuse my pronunciation. Isikholo, a traditional hairstyle indicating that a woman is married and no longer available for courting. Her shoulders are exposed and she is bare-chested. A string of white beads hangs around her neck, adding an elegant contrast to the field of dark brown skin marked by scarification. The image stops before her full breasts come into view. The caption reads, "A typical Zulu woman." It is, so just to say a little bit about that photograph, that postcard, that it had been sort of circulated and it appeared in a book, a 1934 book, Southern Africa, It's the Land and Its Peoples, that was published in Cape Town 2 years before Eslanda's trip. So Eslanda was an enthusiastic correspondent and sent letters and photographic postcards to friends and family from every part of the world. No doubt drawn to the beauty of the image, Eslanda also had something to say about this description. On the back of this postcard, she wrote, "Carlo darling and Fania dear. This is July 4, and I am in Johannesburg with Polly. We have driven over 1,000 miles by car, had grand visits with the king of the Basotos, king of the Swazis, stayed in the same house for days with the chiefs of Bechuana and Kama, chief of the Ba Mungwato. We now go to Buchanan Land, present Botswana, Kimberley, and then fly to Uganda. I have stayed in the homes of African doctors, graduates of Edinburgh, Northwestern, Harvard, and Howard, and found them all keen on anthropology and on things going on abroad. Savages my eye. Look at this beauty, aristocratic, beautiful, charming, and intelligent, and typical. Love, Essie." Eslanda has taken a tourist postcard, an image made in service of colonialism, and subverted the language and logics that reduce this photographed person to a racial and ethnic type. While she remains nameless, the woman's typicality is now unfolded into a more fulsome and complex picture of Black African life. So where I want to end is around the question of uncertainty and around photography as a pedagogical tool. And so I'm going to read a short excerpt from the last chapter of the book called Shelter in Place. If we can go to the next slide, please. Okay, so this chapter begins, "Here's a random sampling of photographs from my phone, March through September 2020. An image of a cruise ship out in the San Francisco Bay, taken from the hill where I walk my dog. My spouse at the dining room table, speaking intensely into his laptop, one arm raised above his head mid-gesticulation. Our family eating dinner at the same dining room table. Industrial-sized containers of Aveeno lotion, Lysol wipes, and Mixed Chicks leave-in conditioner, a still life. My younger kid in a graduation cap and gown in front of our house, standing next to a lawn sign that reads, 'Congratulations, class of 2020. The backs of dozens of protesters and their signs marching through Berkeley, no faces. iPhone images of Zoom sessions before I started taking screenshots. A seemingly endless array of photographs of the sky from my bedroom window. I am an image hoarder who doesn't delete their phone photos, 70,928 as of this writing. And now, looking back, and it doesn't matter when I'm writing this because it is always looking back, I am trying to make sense of these assorted images. I'm wondering what I thought I was seeing, wondered what it is I thought I was saving, capturing, documenting. What knowledge did I think I was producing? What was I trying to learn through the act of making these photographs? When I took them, we were in the midst of at least one pandemic. I couldn't have told you, nor could anyone else, whether this was the opening foray of a soon-to-be contained crisis, the soft side of a flattened curve, or the pernicious creep of a coming storm. I could tell you that we were surrounded by imminent death. My photos from March to September 2020 reveal the tight circuit of my everyday life. Kitchen, bathroom, front yard, dog walk, dining room, bedroom. These photos also demonstrate my privilege, a healthy family, a job that could be transitioned online and its correlate, strong Wi-Fi, not to mention access to good hygiene products in overabundance, and above all, a safe home. Home, it seemed, was the best defense against an indifferent virus we could not see, a malignant federal government that refused to see, and the persistent vulnerability to premature death that we had seen for far too long. And yet, even as we came to rely on home so intensely, we were also reminded that home is permeable, fragile, and precarious, whether by virtue of the people we share it with. Take, for example, the rise in instances of domestic abuse, the neighborhoods we live in, consider the rise in rates of homelessness, or the unrelenting demand for the rent or mortgage we owe. Or maybe it was Breonna Taylor's murder by Louisville police while she slept in her bed as she sheltered in place that reaffirmed for you, as it did for me, that home, especially Black home, is nothing more than a notion, or than a notion in or to a society structured in white supremacy. Reader, are we still waiting for all three of the police officers who participated in her murder to be fired, arrested, indicted, convicted? And if those officers have faced charges, would we call it justice? What is photography in the context of volatility and doubt? From the emergence of the medium, we in the Euro-American context have been taught to think of photography as proof. And certainly proof has been photography's mode of being in the Western world and its call to service. We have been disciplined to engage photographs as assertive, detail-oriented, confident in their gathering up of the past, self-assured in their framing of right now, and even in their function as a medium able to document other worlds and other dimensions. Yet when I look at these photographs from the first year of the pandemic, mine and others, all I see is a true picture of uncertainty. Photo after screenshot after photo, persistently asking questions about the future. But really, has there ever been a photography that didn't emerge from volatility and doubt, that didn't hope to contain the mercurial, settle a debate, or fix a problem? If, since the advent of colonialism, imperialism, and the transatlantic slave trade, we are always already in the midst of catastrophe, as Amy Césaire, Walter Benjamin, and so many others have reminded us, can photography's world-making capacity be anything other than world-proposing? We want photography to be a period, but it's really just a question mark. Increasingly, theorists and lovers of photography have called on us to explore photography's unknowns. Sean Michelle Smith has encouraged us to consider what lies at the edge of sight, outside the photographic frame, what a photograph does not, will not, or cannot register, whether by virtue of the limits of the medium or by the biases of the mediator. Stanley Wolakau Wanambwa directs our attention to, quote, art that interrogates the notional transparency, the efficacy, and intelligibility of the visual as a site through which we encounter, but at the same time fail to know one another, especially in this century whose, quote, optic has been conflagration and catastrophe. Tina Kampt has urged us to listen to the frequencies beyond the visual and the visible that at once amplify and defy the photograph's medium. Teju Cole not only reminds us that photography is a synesthetic experience in which seeing is always more than seeing, but, quote, argues for the urgency of using our senses, interpreted as capaciously as possible, to respond to experience, embrace epiphany, and intensify our ethical commitments, unquote. I'm inspired by these thinkers and so many others who offer reading practices that, quote, show us not seeing. Photography and pandemic, mine and others, felt like a desperate attempt to see and to make meaning when meaning was premature, and indeed when there was nothing to see here. Instead of straining to see what we think might be missing from photographs, what if we embrace exactly what the photograph cannot tell us? Pivot, a favorite pandemic choreography, toward the unknowable, the illegible, the anxious repetition. What kind of reading practice emerges if photography's origin point is uncertainty and unknowing? And I will end there, and I look forward to questions and conversation. Thank you.
Fantastic. Leigh, thank you. Can I thank you on behalf of our audience for a really fascinating insight into your new book? I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say we're really excited to read it and to understand more of the issues that you're grappling with there, which chime so well, as you highlighted, with the aims of the collective. So thank you very much.
Thank you.